Hello, everybody. Welcome to Flyerside Chats. Please find your seats. Um, Thanks for making it out today. I know the weather here in San Francisco is lovely, and you have many other places to be. So I really appreciate you all coming in and spending some time with us to talk a bit about remarketing. Um, I'm Jasper. I run the marketing for AppsFlyer in North America. And just some housekeeping to start us off with. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end of this conversation. And if you're joining virtually, you can basically just throw your questions in the chat. We're going to surface them at the end. And if you're here in person, you know, just ask your questions. Um, Also, if you're here in person, I hope that you'll stick around, join us for a couple of drinks afterwards. We're going to have some light bites, so it's always good to come in. Thanks again for being here. All right, so today we're talking about remarketing, and for me at AppsFlyer, obviously we care a lot about apps, and apps are really like at the core, they're connected to life cycle and the life cycle of a user. It's a branded piece of software on the most personal device. So obviously, you need to think about not only how you acquire users, but how do you keep engaging them again and again. So it's a no-brainer to engage existing users, especially as we're getting into the most busy season. It's basically Labor Day. Q4 is here. What are we going to do about that, right? So it makes sense that there is a surge in messaging to reactivate the users that you created throughout the year. And we've seen this pattern again and again. But at the same time, we've also seen remarketing really taking off in terms of overall UA investment. And we're going to share some stats around this later today. But if everybody's doing it, it becomes very, very crowded. So if you just follow the benchmarks, you're just going to get to like the medium level of what everybody's doing. That's why today we're joined by two experts from Remerge who basically run campaigns day in, day out for their clients and specifically around e-commerce, shopping, finance, gaming, a lot of streaming as well. So they run these campaigns day in, day out, and we want to dive into some of the best practices. Like, how can you stick out, or how can you build a sustainable strategy when everybody is doing what you already like what you're doing as well? So, some real expert. I'm being joined today by Kane from Remerge and by Sean, and they're going to walk us through what they're doing with their clients and also what the takeaways are for you.
Okay, I'm Kane Prost. I'm an account manager. I've been with Remerge for 3.5 years. I've been in the industry about 8 years. So, um, yeah, it's been a while. And I work with gaming, of course, but a lot of non-gaming as well. E-commerce, food, subscription, finance. And yeah, I am looking forward to talking today and sharing. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sean Garcia, Principal Account Manager at Remerge. It's going to be about a year and a half since I joined with them, but I've been in this space. I mean, if you count desktop, which is pretty ancient, so close to a decade, wherever there's people, whether it's desktop, phones, I'm going to find you. And in terms of just my experiences, I've worked across social, gaming, e-com, food delivery apps. I mean, you name it. It's just a wide variety, and I think retargeting makes sense for across all verticals. It's just really getting into the weeds of how we're going to support that need for you. And looking forward to the chat.
Awesome. So why don't we start by just setting the stage around what retargeting is, what you use it for. So when I have to explain that to somebody, I'm always like, well, remember if you, for example, look at a pair of shoes. So it's always like this e-commerce example, right? But if you think about it, and the way that we think about it at AppsFlyer is basically that there are two separate like end goals. On the one hand, you may want to re-engage users and basically like it's about driving existing users into very specific content. So it's almost like a personalization question, right? And then the other play on this is reattribution, where you reactivate churned users or even uninstalled users and try to create general interest for lapsed users with the app. Or is that how you look at this as well? Or what are kind of the plays and what are the goals?
Yeah, definitely. So these two pillars are the main thing. So basically, re-engagement, you want to keep those users in the app. So, MAU, uh, just bringing those users back, even if they're not inactive. So, for example, like you install a user and you want them to come back to the app for the next 7 days. You can use re-engagement. But also you can bring back those users. So anyone who's lapsed 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, I think that depends on what you determine as churned. So bringing those users back is just, bring them back and then you're re-engaging them. So it's like that cycle, the two cycle, that's really, really important. Anything to add on?
I think it's really, what is your ultimate goal when if you think of retargeting overall, it's you have a list of users that you know that you want to target. Is it because they just haven't completed that necessary A event, but you know that they've installed, just haven't they're kind of almost like cart abandoners. I'm kind of relying to like the old school methodology. But like if it's something where it's constant engagement, if you look at across a 7-day like LTV lifespan, that's your main KPIs, and it's just getting them back into the app. That's how you could use retargeting to meet those two core purposes. So really, I think these are the two use cases, and it's really that flexibility that retargeting or remarketing gives you in that sense.
Right, right. So what I hinted at this at the outset, but we recently ran this e-commerce report at AppsFlyer, and basically what we found was that at this point, retargeting or remarketing is taking up somewhere between 83 to 86% of budgets compared to UA. So in a way, you can basically say, well, everybody has done that. Have you seen or is doing that? And do you see that shift as well? Do you see this influx of demand? And what does that really mean for marketers?
Yeah, so this really depends on the vertical too, I think. So I work with e-commerce, food, subscription. They finance too, they have heavily shifted budget towards retargeting. And I think it really depends on the age of the app too, like how known it is. Obviously you don't do that at the beginning, like when you launch and then you don't shift everything to retargeting. But it's just that efficiency, where the money is coming from, who it's coming from. So it just makes sense to keep the, finance really healthy to shift towards retargeting.
And so do you think, because one of the things that we're seeing is kind of this idea of like you harvest users or you plant the seeds throughout the year, right? Where you focus on user acquisition. And then Q4 is really where you see the ramp up in spend. I mean, this example is for specifically for e-commerce. But I think you see that across different verticals. So I guess like the underlying question here is if everybody's doing that, how can you stand out? And does it actually make sense to rethink that pattern, especially as we're going into Q4? Is maybe now the time to leverage cheaper UA budgets as opposed to like investing all this money in retargeting?
So I think the key thing that the differentiation between UA and retargeting is when you're going after UA, you're looking for net new users. You're kind of casting a wide net. For retargeting, we're targeting users or messaging users on the apps where they're at. So when you think of the competition, it's really, the competition within UA might be a certain threshold, but with retargeting, it's almost like we're fine tuning where we're messaging those users. So there might be pockets of efficiency that I think kind of highlights where you're seeing this trend increase with retargeting. So that's one differentiator. So I don't believe you shouldn't not message during this peak time, even though rates may be a little bit higher. That's just my perspective of how I see this trend.
Yeah, I agree. If you have the money, definitely spend it on Q4 just because, the user expectation is really high. They know that there's going to be promo, everyone's going to be buying for holidays. So definitely do that if you have the money for both UA or retargeting. But I would say, and this is my opinion, I don't know if the company supports it, but I would say put 70% of the retargeting money throughout the year to retargeting. So 70% towards retargeting if your app is known, you have a good user base number, and then try to put that 30% to UA during those times because you want to let them know that the promotion is happening. And if you're retargeting throughout the year, the users will be there in the app. So they know what's going to happen. And on top of that, usually when we run like incremental campaigns during promotions, you won't see that much incrementality. So what we see is usually non-promotion times is much more important to run retargeting. So I would say run it throughout the year. If you have the budget, run it during Q4 as well.
Right. But I mean, if you were to talk to like a CMO and they're like, okay, well, we're usually we're reserving like 70% of our retargeting budget for that last quarter, what would you tell them? Sounds like a bad idea? Or
I would say that's a bad idea, just because, as mentioned, like you won't see much incrementality. But it is true. Q4 people will spend. The more you spend, the more you get back. So really, like if you have that money, yeah, sure. But
Right.
running it throughout the year, putting that money in, keeping those user come back in and know what's going to happen during that time is much more healthy.
Right. And I assume that there are also some positive benefits of combining that then within the app messaging at the same time. So you're basically you have this habit already built and you're pushing people. So that you mentioned that they already expect certain behavior in the app. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. Um, Beyond holiday retail, are there any like underrated seasonal peaks in verticals like finance,
Yeah.
travel, gaming?
So I was gonna go, when we're looking at the peak season, that might not necessarily align with a specific vertical. So if we think of finance, their Fourth of July or their Super Bowl is tax day. So a lot of, buildup that goes before everyone gets their refund. And then if you think of your specific finance app, is there specific rates that might change with this influx of people getting the returns? Do you want to support that endeavor? Do you want to put their money into maybe like a new IRA or something that your app supports? That quarter, that timeline is their peak season. So really, you have to obviously know and understand the app and the partner that you're working with, but identifying what their peak seasons are and what their essential, Q4, Q3 is going to be. You really got to keep that in mind when you're working with different partners.
Right. And what are some of the indicators that you're looking at there? Like, or how do you incorporate that into your discovery process?
So when it comes to finance in general, I mean, understanding trends, if they've been a client for, a while, you can start to see the trends and just see, is this really going to just play out quarter over quarter, or do they want to zag when other people are, zigging? A lot of people are spending a lot in Q4. Maybe they want to hold off budget, kind of like what Kanai was saying, and spread it across the other quarters. These are conversations that I think every smart marketer, or even like, as an account manager, you want to have those conversations because you want to support your clients at the end of the day. I think what differentiates us between maybe sales and CSMs or account management, at the end of the day, we want to do what's best, whether it may be a reduction in spend at a given time. We want to sustain the partnership at the end of the day and meet your guys' KPIs.
Yeah, and also to add to that, so if you spend, first like equally throughout the year, you start to see patterns where users spend more, where they don't, and then the next year you can try to expand more. Because where you know when they're spending, you can put money into that, and then you'll just see like that double or triple. So you really have to know where that seasonality is, like where do payers pay?
Right. And so just because we're talking about seasonality, I'm curious, is this a very app specific question where you see these pockets? I mean, seasonality implies that there are like overarching patterns. So I guess my question is, to what degree can you take learnings from one app and transfer it to the next? Like, to what degree can you apply these learnings?
I'd say it's quite app specific, brand specific. Um,
Mhm.
for example, like gaming, I think it's really hard to see the seasonality too. There could be for each app title, user expect like something to happen in-app event for that, but it is hard to tell. We very rely on like historical data too
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
organic.
I could see that. I mean, we work with a gaming app with very, let's say, multiplayer capabilities, and for them, the best year is like New Year's Day because that is when families gather and start to play together. So it's very sometimes you go into these very like clear pockets that are specific to the product itself. Yeah.
I mean, even if you like take a step back from a macro level, like depending on the region of the app that you're, messaging, the seasons are obviously quite different across the globe. There's different holidays that you might support
Right.
that may not align
Right.
with the same that's traditionally in the US. I think what you were saying about gaming, I think is totally true. Like more mature games, how can you entice users that may have lapsed after a while? It's not going to be necessarily a specific quarter, but an in-game event that you want to ramp up to that can happen in the summer, over the winter months, depending on the region.
Mhm.
There's some localized creatives that are tied to it that, really kind of hype up the event. It's really just being agile with the client to understand and engage when those peaks are going to happen.
Right. Right. Cool. So, when you think about, let's go a little bit deeper into like the specific tactics that you're using. And I was wondering, what are the common mistakes that you see in segmentation specifically, and how can marketers refine their approach to segmenting for retargeting and remarketing?
Do you want to go first? We have quite a few best practices that people sometimes don't use. Um, I would say the first one is uh, the utilization of one links or deep linking in general. A lot of times when we're working with clients who have very good UA background and then they enter the retargeting space, sometimes we'll see the same links. And if you think about it, if someone has uninstalled and you use the same kind of standard tracking links, they're getting sent to the respective Play Store or App Store. That user experience isn't ideal. If you have creative where you're utilizing deep links and it's for a new feature within the game or a token, and that user is expecting to get that user experience, and they're getting sent to the Play Store, that can immediately just kill the vibe. I know there's someone from Vibe here, but give me $5 later. No, but I'm saying, like it's kind of just one of those things where it's working with partners like AppsFlyer just to set that up. I feel like it should be pretty turnkey and something that oftentimes we see clients may skip that initial step, but it's really that streamlinedness that I think is more beneficial. You see the impact of it on retargeting.
Cool.
Speaking about segmentation, I think you asked like which like unique ones there are. Um, I think this really goes into like each vertical. For example, subscription. This is something that you're for example you're chasing for paid users and things, and um, really knowing the timing of when to target them is really important. So you don't want to target someone who for a subscription right after they made a subscription. Like that's just really, really bad. And this may not be unique, but I feel like that's knowing when to target them is really, really important. And to do that, data sharing with the MMP is really, really important. And early stage. So we know that pattern. We can look through organic and, other users and learn from that and then suggest any kind of segmentation. So, yeah.
Okay. So what would you say? So that's kind of the benchmarks, don't mess up your links, like make sure that you have like that you don't like retarget users when they're not ready for it. Is there anything that sets apart like the top 5% of your user base or your client base in terms of how they approach retargeting?
I would say, so maybe not 5%, but I would recommend all of the app marketers to really deep dive into the user pattern. So and I think we're going to talk about inactivity window later, but there is a standard of like 3-day or 7-day inactivity window that people use. Don't just use the standard, I would say. So one of the food client, we did a deep dive into it, and then we just knew that like at the second day of install, they didn't do any other activity after that. And that way, we were able to adjust the inactivity window from 7-day to 2-day and where they drop off. So that kind of like looking into your user really, really deep into is really important. Yeah.
Well, you gave me some more time to think about this. So I would say the top 5% of clients, and if I'm ranking it based on like performance or just savviness, I guess,
Mhm.
if how we would rank that. Um, I mean, obviously they'd have one links already. Mix of creatives, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more about creatives, but having a mix of video, statics, we can build playables, but sometimes they'll have that in-house or rich media ads, depending on the vertical too, and the different sizes, and just allowing us to expand our reach. I think we have a playbook when it comes to, I guess, the different verticals and suggest audiences when maybe they don't have that expertise. But I think the top 5% are very aware of who their target audience is and what they're trying to achieve. Um, I think everyone who is in this industry knows there's a new acronym every day. And when a client brings in a new acronym, but then they go into, what are they actually looking to achieve and how they want to target it, they already have a mindset or a framework of what they're looking to achieve for those existing users or lapse users. I think that's what separates, the 5% across the board.
Another segmentation that this was coming from the client side, so kudos to the client, but I thought was really interesting how to use it is whenever there's like a product launch and they haven't launched it yet, they would target the existing users to get notification. So it's like the entrance, but it's not really a segmentation, but a unique way to use retargeting. It's like awareness and promoting the product. But also by doing that, taking the users to get notification, they go into the app and then they buy other things. So this campaign specifically was going for the CPA to push that notification button. But on additional benefit was that we would see ROAS as well, because by bringing them in, they were buying things. And I thought that was very unique.
Right. Yeah, that's I think that's really interesting, like how people there's something about like really understanding your user behavior, knowing kind of the points, the conversion points in the app and so on, and doing that, like having testable hypotheses that you can then verify or falsify. Um, we talked a little bit about, and we already mentioned that the timing, but like maybe you can walk us through the best practices for timing retargeting in the user lifecycle. Like what are for example, inactivity windows, how short or long should they be? Like what have you seen there?
Yeah, this one is really depending on who you want to bring in. And I would say, do both in the sense of like shorter inactivity as much as possible. As I mentioned, like that food company where they saw that people were dropping off, weren't doing anything after install. Target those users. In that case, the inactivity is going to be really, really short. Also, you know, you bring in a user, doesn't depend on what they're doing or what they're like, if they're coming back or not. You just want them to come back constantly, then you don't even have to set an activity window. But there's users that you want to bring back that are, you know, churned or uninstalled. Um, that really depends on what you determine as churned. After, usually in gaming, we would say like after 7 days, they probably moved on to another game. So that
Right.
could be a churn too.
Yeah, I think just to piggyback on the like inactivity window, like what's the best like range? I think oftentimes you'll have a client that's running both UA and retargeting. And so they want to keep things as church and state as possible because they don't want to have the two campaigns just cannibalizing or like the attribution windows kind of getting funky. But I think once we go live with a campaign and we can see that organic data, I think as Connie was saying, we can oftentimes see that the inactivity window that they set doesn't align with the user behavior of what a user churns or stops using the app. So it's really at the end of the day, we will adhere to the settings that our clients set, but it's just a data point that we always provide to let them know this is a certain number of days or window that you're missing out of a user because of this arbitrary inactivity window. Because at the end of the day, if you want that user to convert, should we change or at least align the numbers of that window that meets what's happening organically or what's happening in your user base?
I would also add on that for like churned users, we don't look further than 360 days, I would say, just because people change their phones all the time. It doesn't really make sense to target those users. So if you're putting your time into trying to like target those users, I would say stop that.
Okay, that sounds about right. Um, but yeah, so how do you then approach these conversations like with a client who's basically saying, yeah, no, this is what we have in mind. Like how do you convince them? What are the data points that you're bringing to these conversations?
So I think we've mentioned, you know, the organic data that we could see, you know, utilizing the postbacks that we get. We can see the behavior of not only the campaigns that we perform, just, you know, unattributed overall organics. So we can start to understand the patterns there. Um, Competitor data, while we keep it as clean as possible, just sharing just insights from there of what best practices work for a similar app that's in this vertical. Not necessarily to say like, hey, you need to do it exactly like this, but let them know that this is something that we've seen success with.
Right.
At the end of the day, we provide the information and the client needs to make that decision. We're not as pushy. So we could just provide the data and let our clients make those decisions.
Right. Great. So that's the targeting and like how you run the campaigns. You mentioned creative. So if I'm explaining to people, retargeting is basically where you see the same pair of shoes again and again. All you need is like a photo of the shoes, like show that to people. I assume that that's not the current status. So what are the best practices around like creative that you are seeing? And is it more diverse than just like resurfacing the same content?
Yeah, I that actually brings you back to like a previous question you asked about like best practices or things that we've seen. I think when we get creative, and you can just obviously tell it's UA based when the CTA button says install. And I think all of us have seen ads where we've already had the app, we're already engaging in it, and then the last thing you want to see is an ad for that same app telling you to install. So I think right off the bat, just having differentiated creative for retargeting between UA, I think is it's a must-have because there's clearly you're engaging a user that's already made that decision to install. They just need to be reminded depending on what your goals are. Um, and then I want to highlight a gaming example where I brought up earlier where it was a game that's very mature, wants to bring back lapsed users, and they've made updates within their app or new game
Mhm.
features. Maybe it's just a new character. Those are the type of creatives that I think I've seen successful in that vertical where the user base may be lapsed for quite some time. Maybe they've moved on, but it's a new feature or something that at the end of the day that it was a need or something that was just missing from that app. That's the type of creative that's going to resonate for someone when you're bringing them back or resurrecting that user. So that's just like one specific example, but from a creative standpoint, immediately like you need to have a differentiation between UA and retargeting when you're talking about creative messaging.
Right. So does that mean no recycling of assets, or is it really just the call to action? Is it basically like to what degree do you need to remind people that this is the same game or beyond games, right?
I would say that, for example, TikTok ads, style ads, they, use it for UA, and then actually those work for retargeting as well, like quite well. And I would say, for like evergreen creatives, we do adopt UA towards like creative as well, just changing the CTA, and it's fine. But usually a specific message or feature does work really well. Also, I want to add on to Sean did mention that, having all of those ad type is super important. And especially when we're looking for a specific user, right, in retargeting, like it's really important to be able to cover all of the inventory. So having the image, videos, HTMLs, natives, having that makes us helps us find those users, fast and efficiently. So really important to have those. Some examples, maybe.
Yes, let's look at the examples.
Great segue.
Okay. So, as mentioned, HTML and rich media, these have been doing really well. And it's just engaging, having the CTA all the time does help too. When they're engaging, they can, click into it and just go into the app immediately without waiting for it to finish. So yeah, these are some examples. It's really working well.
I mean, at minimum, you see the button
Yeah.
is highlighting something to get the existing user back. The last thing you want is install or just something that just doesn't resonate for an existing user.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Also just to, I don't know if I can keep talking, but
You that, of course.
I so there was a study where we did with a finance client where we were really looking into what the pattern is with the performance with each design and like text, color, and we found that between iOS and Android there was a huge difference between what worked and what didn't. And for example, like iOS users, they really preferred and performed really well in more ambiguous message and more like clean design, sophisticated lifestyle messages. But for Android, it needed to be way more specific. So like putting in numbers, how much you're going to save. This is the benefit that you're going to get. So that was really interesting to see within this client.
Interesting. What do you think drives that? Is that also like based on demographics or user base?
I think it's the user base. So TikTok style worked really well with iOS users. Um, and for Android, I would say it's just, there's probably like a difference in the user too between iOS and Android, like, yeah.
I mean, you're an Android user, so
I'm an
that
Android
resonates
user.
with you.
Yes. Yeah.
Just kidding.
We can have that as
I
a
need
warm-up
the
question.
Yeah.
first. Yeah. How much am I gonna save?
But that's really interesting because originally, like Apple's privacy changes, right, were expected to kill off retargeting effectiveness, especially on iOS, and yet we're seeing it thriving on iOS. Like,
Yeah.
what is the real story behind this contradiction?
I think so I'm gonna date myself, but like GDPR was such a big deal where it was like going to kill the cookie, and then obviously it passed, and then I felt like Scan, it was like the same conversation. I think initially there was this big scare of like, how are we all going to pay the bills moving forward? But I think at the end of the day, the opt-in rates on iOS are a lot larger, or like the audience sizes are a lot larger than maybe folks um, initially thought. We're seeing a lot of iOS campaigns thrive for retargeting. I think when we're thinking about just minimums, I'm sorry if I misquote this, but like we can run campaigns where the audience size is 10K, for some of the smaller regions, or that's just like our ability to target that, and it ranges
Even smaller.
or even smaller. So I think it shouldn't scare you in terms of running retargeting on iOS. The match rates or the opt-in rates are a lot higher than we think. Um, and I think at the end of the day, when you're thinking about the conversions between iOS and Android, and I don't want to be uh, stereotypical, but like you see stronger engagement and kind of conversions on iOS. So while the audience size may be small, maybe potentially quality is there that makes up for that between the two OSs.
They definitely spend more. I think that's what you wanted to say, Sean. So yeah, the ROAS is just really, really different. Even if with the smaller audience size, we typically, I would say we see like 1/3 of Android when we have the same segmentation. iOS is much smaller, but it's worth targeting those users. You put the same amount, you will definitely see a higher ROAS through iOS users. So a lot of our clients put probably 60% or more into iOS, even if there's a difference in audience size.
Right. All right. So I want to congratulate ourselves. We've made it, I think, 45 minutes into this conversation or so, and we haven't talked about AI yet. That's going to change. Don't worry, it's just one question, but an important one. So AI-driven segmentation and bidding are bound to transform basically how we approach, how we bid, how we target. What are some practical AI applications that you are seeing at Remerge today, if any?
Oh, you said you were taking this one.
Yes. So, I mean, any company has been adopting AI, and especially our data scientist has. So we adopt AI in the back end, of course, operationally too. But finding the user. So basically 3 points. Finding who is paying. So the pattern. What was DNN?
Data neural networks is one way that we utilize it.
Exactly. And just data processing for AI has been really, we have been putting that so we can process much faster and then find the right user and calculate the right pay amount, so impression. So that is some way that our company is using it. I can't talk to technical too. So
there was another one. So for creatives, when you're thinking about A/B testing and best practices, we do use AI to automatically make those decisions based on performance so that we kind of get a quicker understanding of what ad resonated with a particular audience set. And then outside of that, really just those annoying emails that we send with the M dash is probably another way that AI is used. No, that's might be a personal.
Yeah, that's the telltale sign. All right, so as we're wrapping up, I was wondering, are there any misconceptions that you run into, specifically when it comes to marketers, how they approach retargeting, and how do you address those?
I can take that. So there's quite a lot. One that's really popular is that you are cannibalizing the organic behavior. And I would say that's not true. As long as you know your user and how they pay, how often they pay, what their pattern is, you won't be cannibalizing them. As long as you set the right inactivity window, you will be targeting them at the right point without cannibalizing organic. And also utilize your first party data as well. So like LTV data that you have. blend those in with the signals that you're getting from AppsFlyer, MMP. And yeah, that way you won't. What were the other ones that
I think another misconception was like, why would someone spend on retargeting? Like, we already have these existing users. And I think the misconception of that is, well, you may have gotten them to install, but did they actually do the subsequent conversion event, or make that first purchase? Um, you know, engage in the game after a certain number of time? Did they actually make those events? By utilizing retargeting, we see 5 to 10x more cost efficient than acquiring the actual new user. So it's one of those misconceptions that you're just wasting money on an existing user, but actually you're kind of nudging them to make the event that you already spent your acquisition marketing dollars on, and you're just adding a little bit more to get them to that final destination. Um, so that's kind of what I would say to folks who are maybe apprehensive to retargeting with so much UA experience.
Another is if the product is good enough, users will naturally come back. And I think you just have to remind them. So uh, the studies show that on average, on a person's phone, there's like more than 100 apps. And basically, those people are only using probably 10 or so apps on a daily basis out of that 100, so 10%, without reminding those users that that app is in your phone. They're not going to probably use it. They probably forgot about it, and then they'll see another UA ad and then install, and then that's the end of it. So um, don't rely too much on the product, and try to constantly send the message to the user. Also, there's we get arguments, not arguments, but objections saying that the CRM efforts is probably enough. So email, and then push notification. There's definitely going to be a chunk of user that opt out of it. So collect who those users are and then target them through paid channels. That's the only way to target those users.
So if a skeptical CFO comes to you and basically asks, okay, so why are we paying for users that we've already won over? Like those are kind of the key points, like the small nudges along the way that go beyond the scope of the normal app. Um, does that
Yeah,
about
I
sum it
mean,
up?
I think I might have jumped the gun, but yeah, it's really like you have this user base that's just needs that gentle push, or needs that just kind of reminder. The cost efficiency of that is, I think it shows. And I think if you see the trends of retargeting kind of increasing over time, I think it kind of highlights that, where folks are starting to get a little bit more savvy to understand that once you know, is it the cost of acquisition of a user, or is it an LTV, understanding what those events are going to be, and then creating that audience, whether through AppsFlyer audiences or first party data. We're seeing that trend, and I think it's an exciting time for retargeting to actually just explore what those capabilities are as folks are getting a little bit more savvy.
Yeah, I totally agree. And UA channels aren't going to know who your payers are, and they don't know when the user churns or anything. So retargeting is the only place where you can look into that pattern and then target them and bring them back. So, UA is just the beginning. And if you want those users to stick with your app for years, you have to do retargeting and bring them back and remind them.
All right. Well, on that note, any questions from the audience that we haven't answered yet?
Thanks. I have a question to Kaning. Um, so you said that you work with also a lot of restaurant and like subscription type of app. What's a strategy or what a channel or type that they use for retargeting work the best for the restaurant one vertical and the subscription vertical? Yeah, of course, if they have all the money in the world, they'll blow all the channels, CRM, yeah, like everything creative. but was the marketing like budget got cut down? What are some very cost-effective way, like combination strategy you see?
Yeah, happy to answer that. So for subscription, you can either bring those users back to use the app and increase, MAU, DAU. So you can do that. Not many clients, to be honest, use it that way. They use it to bring users back to pay. So for the paid subscription, either they haven't made that paid subscription yet, or a user who has churned. In I would say first time buyer segment is something that's much more popular with that client. But if they have the data that, they know who churned and know at what timing, then it makes total sense to run that user, because a user who has paid before is much more easier to bring back to pay again. First time buyers tend to be much higher to make that first move. So I would say like run it both for subscription. For food, I would say first time buyers definitely, but definitely the users who has paid before, so past purchasers, is something that you try to target most. So they put in a ton of money in those users who make the purchase. And a smart client would have like a profile of who the midnight users, or you know more than one time a week users, or weekend users. They have the profiling done. So having that data, it makes it much easier for us to target those users as well in a smart way. So those are some of the things that go into food and subscription.
I think a cool thing too, where if there's a particular co-branding initiative within restaurants or food, like you want to highlight, um, a new to grocery store that's you're in collaboration, maybe like Whole Foods, and there's just a little bit more incentivization to kind of convert in those particular markets, or like that particular grocery shopping or new restaurant. You can almost use that knowledge and have a separate kind of one-off campaign where you're messaging the same users, but it's promoting that cross branding. And that's just an additional incremental budget that kind of wins out, not just for us because we're messaging these users, but then for that partner that we're working with who has that incentive. It's almost like a win-win. So that's like one other strategy that I think I've seen in the past, or it has been kind of an initiative in that vertical. Sure.
Just want to dive in further on the co-branding part. So can you give an example on the co-branding? Like if,
Yeah.
for example, I'm just thinking of if KFC co-brand with Whole Foods. That's not a
No. So a good co-brand is, I'm just going to use DoorDash, may or may not have worked with them in the past. But say, they started off with food delivery and restaurants, and you could do pickup and delivery. And then they started to incorporate grocery stores, or if you wanted to buy flowers at a florist, you can also go as far as you're on a golf trip and you need golf balls. I know you can buy that on DoorDash, but most people may not know that that's a feature within the app. So if they're partnering closely with, I'm just going to use Whole Foods again as an example, where it's like they want to advertise this new feature within the app where you can now do your grocery shopping. It's very, obvious to us now, but in the past, that was a new feature. And then any marketing or any dollars that got spent within Whole Foods, it was almost like an additional kind of incentive for DoorDash because they spent so much money on marketing this new initiative, this new feature. If you can create a segment that targets that with the purpose of getting those users to convert specifically for Whole Foods, it's a win-win for everyone. That's kind of what the gist of co-branding.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Mhm.
I think we had one more question. Then
Yeah, how do you go about troubleshooting an underperforming remarketing program? How do you do it systematically?
We don't have enough time for this. No.
What do you mean by underperforming? You want to?
I might need a second. Yeah, if you have an answer.
That really depends on what kind of number we're seeing. So I would first doubt that if we're probably not targeting the right people and maybe not the right time. So for example, and also, is your goal reasonable? That's something that I would talk with them too. Where is that goal calculated from? Is it based on UA or any other channel? So that's something that we would talk with the client and just test. So for example, we have this experiment tool where we can test different variants where, for example, like different inactivity window or different frequency, for example, different creative. That is probably the way to try to find out where is the good place to target. And then, is the budget right too?
I'm glad you said budget. Yeah, because sometimes while it's not necessarily linear, it could just be a mix of the spend that we're allocating and it's the audience set that we have could result in lower performance than other partners. Another thing that you highlighted was, is the goal actually the right goal set for that campaign? I think oftentimes, you'll have UA goals that just get kind of translated to retargeting, or they're not taking in consideration the audience. So a campaign that's running in LATAM might have the same goal as something in the US, and the audience mix is just completely different. It's almost 5x. Should those have the same goals? Those are the sort of things that I check off in my head first. And then I get into kind of the campaign setup. Are we utilizing one links? What's our attribution windows? Do we have the right creative mix? Those are certain things that I look into as well. And then at the end of the day, is there just, you know, trends from a macro level? Is Q1 just not the quarter for you guys, and just makes sense if we want to be a long-term partner, making those adjustments so that we can support you guys when it does make sense to kind of ramp up in the other quarters? I think it's a great question that summarizes a lot of things that we talked about. So thank you, and we'll give you your $5 later.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today virtually, and for everybody who's here. It's time to get a drink. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.